Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Paul Yock. I want to welcome you on behalf of the staff and faculty of Biodesign to what I think is going to be a great Innovators Workbench. Those of you who have been here for prior workbenches will realize that we have a slight change in the cast here. So David Kasich, who usually does these interviews, is traveling in Europe. And fortunately, we have a fantastic substitution, Uday Kumar. Uday is a complete biodesign character. So he was a fellow with us, directed the global program. He directs strategic vision for biodesign. And on the side, started a couple of companies that are really great. So it's good that he's here. He's going to introduce Mike in just a second. I want to make the point that we are audio recording this, so please put your cell phones on quiet. You get to see this before anything happens to it. So, but you don't behave, okay? Just
that's all right.
Yes. The other thing, thinking about Mike, that I want to say publicly. Biodesign program is supported completely from outside funds, and Boston Scientific has been a generous supporter over the years, big part of what we've been able to do. So if you could just please join me with this.
You should pass the hat now. Church.
I like the way you think. We'll have a reception afterwards right out in the hallway here. And we'll have time for questions and answers at the end of the session. So with that, Uday, please take it away.
Thank you. Can you all hear me? Oh, there we go. So
Matt Lauer. You're Matt Lauer.
Yeah, exactly. Well, pros and cons of that. So I think, again, this is great to have you. I know you're very busy, Mike. Thanks for taking the time to come out here. And thanks for everyone for making the trip and braving the parking to be here. So let me introduce Mike briefly. And I think the way we'll conduct the interview is really try to go through different periods of kind of your career and really where you see med tech and health tech going now, but also trying to help the folks in the audience think about as early innovators, as people interested in innovation, startups, and bringing new technology to help patients, weaving that story, since I know culture and other things about team building and company are really important to you. So it should be a fun hour. So Mike's the chief executive of Boston Scientific. Of course, he joined in 2011. He became president and CEO in 2012, and most recently in 2016 became chairman of the board. For those of you who don't know, obviously Boston Scientific is a major medical technology player. It does about $8 or $9 billion in revenue per year.
Nine.
8
or 9. What's up with that?
That was in
all right.
the press. Forward-looking statements are up to you. So anyways, they have about 27,000 employees. They serve about 24 million, or touch 24 million patients a year, and are established in about 125 countries. Obviously, a range of different areas from cardiovascular or CRM, cardiac rhythm, interventional, urology, endoscopy, women's health, so neuromodulation. So we'll touch on all that, but ahead of a very, very major firm that over the last few years has seen a lot of growth. So maybe we can start, Mike, by going back to the beginning. You after you graduated, maybe you can start with telling us why medical devices, medical technologies, and you went to GE to start, correct?
Yeah. So first of all, it's great to be here. It's an honor to be here. I definitely had the lowest ACT score in the room, for sure. I told my son I was speaking with a bunch of Stanford engineers. He said I'm way over my head. And so it really is a pleasure to be here. I'll get you a question in a minute, but I was just in Beijing last week, and they want to replicate Silicon Valley. And I'm like, man, that's angel dust. That's hard to replicate, but it's great to be here. Why med tech? I'll tell you real quick. I wasn't smart enough to be a doctor. My grandfather was a cardiac surgeon, and he was kind of my somebody I admired so much as a kid. And when I got out of college, I tried to get a job with GE Healthcare, and they wouldn't hire me because I wanted to be in the healthcare field. And they said you needed 2 years of training. And so I got a job selling door-to-door computer systems for NCR to hotels in Indiana. And I had enough experience after 18 months that I kept knocking on the door of GE Healthcare, and they finally hired me. And so I just always wanted to be in the healthcare field. So I've been in the healthcare field since 2 years post college graduation my entire career in different companies. But it's, I can't imagine, to me, having passion for what you do is the most important thing, way more than the money. And I can't imagine a field other than healthcare where you feel so good about what you do, even on bad days. Mm-hmm. And whenever I have a bad day, I just go out with our sales team or our engineers, see what the engineers are doing in the lab or what our sales team are doing with customers. But it's just an incredible place, incredible field to work in.
And we'll pick up on that role of perseverance in some of at the later part of the conversation about the winning spirit in Boston Scientific. But tell us a little bit about what you did at GE. So now you got your foot in the door. Yeah. What were you planning on? What did you do there? Because you were there for quite a number of years before you went to GSA.
Yeah,
GHS.
Yeah, I love GE. I was there for 10 years, and I grew up in the sales and marketing area. So my first job was selling nuclear cardiology cameras in North and South Carolina, and I did that for a number of years. And then I went to the CT specialist role for the Southeast, and then I went and had my MBA. And I got my PhD in chemical engineering. Didn't do that. I went to get my MBA. Dave, that's not the case. I went to get my MBA at Knight there, and then I was promoted my first job, big management job in the Rocky Mountain region, covering about 12 states for all of their sales and service. And then at the time, Jeff Immelt started buying little IT companies. And he said he needs somebody who doesn't know about IT but knows about GE and is willing to take a bit of a risk. And so he took a risk, and he had me start up some of their healthcare IT, which is their PACS businesses and so forth. So I did that for GE for 11 years before I left to go to Global Healthcare Exchange.
So was that, we oftentimes, young people go through different places in their career where you have to shift, going from capital equipment, obviously you understood imaging, but to PACS and IT. What was that like in terms of a new frontier, just trying it, or, how did you view that? Yeah,
that was maybe the craziest thing I've done is looked at different paths from capital equipment to IT, and then I went to a startup, and then I went to a big device company and knew not much about med devices. So I just was very motivated at GE at the time to advance my career. And what I noticed at GE at the time under Jeff Immelt was that those who sometimes took the hairiest jobs, the tougher jobs, and did well with them, you had a chance to differentiate yourself a bit more. And what I noticed over time, when you take a tough assignment and you do well, then you're willing to take a different tough assignment, you build more confidence internally, and you have more of a willingness to take something on that's riskier because you believe in yourself and the team that you can do it. So over time, I have a super supportive wife and at that time little kids, and so I was able to move around a lot. And I was just probably ambitious, and it worked out. But I'll say just on leadership, because he moved his headquarters to Jeff Immelt to Boston recently, and I got to see him the other day. And early in my career, I don't know if there's a question on this later on, but there's another gentleman, I will give you the name, who was running GE before that. And what I learned from him was he had incredibly tough metrics and goals, but he didn't have the followership. The way he ran the company, I would call it uninspiring, but very tough metrics and very tough. But then Jeff came in and he ran GE Medical with the same type of, maybe even tougher metrics. But he had a leadership style and collaboration and authentic that you would do anything, not anything, but most everything, to help the company. And I learned a lot just from that.
So that's, those important points about as we get further to talk about your role at Boston. But after GE, you went to a startup, Global Health Exchange. Maybe you want to tell people about that, because in that role, I think, was that your first president role or running a company?
I guess I was the second employee, so it was me and the head of HR, so we could do kind of whatever you wanted to be. So I don't think anybody was anybody old. I know maybe Tom, but was anybody else remember the internet when that started, like in 1999? There was a couple people maybe my age here. That was You were 20 at the time. So this was the company's still around. Actually, they're doing quite well. It's called Global Healthcare Exchange. They're owned by a VC firm here in California. And I'm proud of it because it's the only surviving what was called the internet era, the big boom of internet companies. There was a bunch of business-to-business consortia created for the auto industry, the food industry, all kinds of them, hundreds of them. And this is the only one that actually survived, and actually survived and thrives today. So I'm really proud of that. That's after years ago. But anyway, so when I was with GE, you had all, I'm not going to try to go too much work here, but you had all the big suppliers came together: Medtronic, J&J, Abbott, Baxter, GE, and quite frankly, the group purchasing organizations were creating exchanges to get between the suppliers and the customer and charging more admin fees. So the big suppliers came together and said, we're going to put a stop to that. We'll create our own exchange. And they wanted the CFO to come from GE and the CEO from J&J. And the CEO from J&J candidate didn't take it. And so I said, I want to interview. And so I ended up getting it. And I think I was the only candidate. There wasn't a big long list of people who wanted it because it was just a startup idea. And the value prop for me at the time was I could stay on the GE payroll, stay on the GE stock options, and try the startup. But very quickly, 3 months after that promise, we started raising more money, and the board said, you need to quit GE. And so I ended up leaving GE and starting up this startup company and moving to Colorado. And it's probably the job where I learned the most of any job that I've had, was that my experiences at Global
So maybe
Healthcare
we could pull on that thread a little bit, but like what, going from GE, a well-established company, you were in these big divisions, took a risk in IT a little bit,
Yeah.
but probably differentiated yourself at that time to be able to get into GHX. What
Right.
were the things that you learned about? Because again, around here, small companies, startups are kind of, in the water, so we think that's, what made you think, when you look back, that was such a valuable experience?
So, well, a couple things. One is I wanted the chance at the time to lead a startup, but kind of under the backing of GE. And that went away after 3 months. And so then it was kind of on your own. And so I learned the most in that job because at a big company, typically you don't worry about the balance sheet as much or making payroll. And so all those things about every dollar counts is something I learned a lot about. And just trying to create a vision for this company, which was kind of clay at the time, and then trying to sell that to investors. I learned a ton from that. And then I also learned a lot about risk-taking in that job, because shortly after we started the company, the dot-com internet crashed, and most of the companies crashed. And so we were really scrambling to grow the company. And not to go through too much history, but there was a case where there's competitive exchanges, and we actually rolled all those up, not by buying them, but convincing the other CEO and chairman that we should combine. And we would actually have third parties come out and do an assessment as to how it should be run and so forth. And so we took risks on to consolidate the market. I can tell a lot of stories. I'll tell you one quick story. We were at the board meeting, and Siemens wanted to come in. This is on audio tape. Anyway, there's some interesting stories. I won't talk about that one, but
You're amongst friends.
yeah, at dinner.
Yeah. Oh, all right. So,
Yeah, that's too good. It's too good a story.
Well, I think the point, though, that when I was thinking about your career in this startup phase, how it may have impacted what you've done since then in terms of that experience, because in a lot of big companies, people have been in big companies throughout, and even if you run a division, it's not the same when you have 10,000, 20,000 people behind you. So after this experience where you're there for a couple years, you went back to big medical devices. I've been in medical devices since. So tell us what made you go. The next phase was J&J
Right.
and DePuy
So what
and going
happened
to
with
ortho.
Global Healthcare Exchange? We ended up, we were these suppliers originally. And to get scale, we had to combine with all these hospital exchanges and so forth. So we ended up doing all that. And our board ended up being manufacturers that competed with each other, group purchasing organizations, and distributors. So what I learned so much in that job is how to collaborate effectively, but you don't have to win the vote 10-0. You can win 6-4 and try to push the ball more quickly. So we had this very interesting, all these big industry players on the board of directors. And many times the services that we wanted to create maybe conflicted with some of their own businesses. And so that was interesting. And so we basically we found a channel where Global Healthcare Exchange could connect all these hospitals together, automate purchasing, provide reporting, do all this kind of work. And then at the time, I felt that to drive the most value, it should be spun out and owned by private equity, or a chance to take it public so you can really maximize the growth of the company and the value. And at the time, the board didn't want to do that. And so I started looking around, and thankfully through my time at Global Healthcare Exchange, the board members were all these major suppliers, and J&J asked me to come over at their time to run their orthopedics companies, which was a huge change for me because I was living in Colorado, working at this IT company where everybody had a dog and a skateboard in the office. And then I went over to J&J, and I had never been in the med device industry at all to lead their orthopedic group, so I didn't know much about orthopedics. And I really didn't, the gentleman that hired me, Mike Dormer, ended up leaving 30 days after I joined. So he was gone. So it was a whole new company, quite frankly, and it was a new industry for me and a new location. But it was great.
Well, it seems like that. Clearly, hopefully, you're all getting the sense that you're not afraid of taking a risk or trying something new. So what about DePuy and Ortho? You know, was that the opportunity, or or how did you settle on just that? And then what did you envision you were going to do? How did you get up to speed in this new area?
Yeah. So what I decided, and this is not for everybody, because so many people I started working with at GE, and these are more sales-oriented, but I say the same thing with our team here. If you want to be an engineer or a sales rep in San Fran, and this is where you want to be forever, fantastic. You know, you don't need to move all over the darn place, and it's a virtual world. We have all kinds of tools now, so it's not needed. But I was very motivated after I'd been at Global Healthcare Exchange to be a CEO of a larger company. That's what motivated me. And I knew in order to do that, that it needed big substance company. And when I joined J&J, I joined J&J not with the notion I was going to leave, but it was a great company, and they offered me to run the orthopedics companies, which is a big risk on their side. So I don't know why they did that, but they did that. And so, that worked out terrific. And for me, it was a great leadership challenge because I didn't have internal alliances within the company other than the guy that hired me who left. And then I got to know Bill Weldon, the CEO, quite well. And then the whole industry was new to me. And so, I was a finance major at University of Iowa. I was an engineer at Stanford here. So I just think the most important thing in leadership is having a great team around you and empowering the team as much as you possibly can to move quickly, to provide guidance and support, and try to force tough strategic decisions so you can allocate capital the right ways, and create a winning spirit culture. And that's what we did within DePuy, and it turned out to be, we went through a great growth period and worked really hard to acquire Synthes, which happened. And so I learned a lot about the business, and the most important thing is to act like you don't know a lot about the business and try to fake it when you don't know it. And if you're very humble about it and supportive, then you build a lot of alliances on your team. And you have the right people's back, but you make the right decisions. And then eventually you build credibility. And then we built credibility within the company because we did a couple of big deals there.
Do you think you're coming in as an outsider to these other entities? Obviously, you didn't come with baggage because people don't know you. But were you also able to take a different view on how things are done, which was probably something that maybe, and again, we'll probably talk about this when we get to Boston too, but
absolutely. So I won't pick on one of our divisions, but there's a division in our company where essentially if you're not from that background, they don't want to hire you. And so that was the case in the orthopedics world as well. And I came in brand new. And so you see things quite differently. And you also, by that, you can challenge the leaders to try to open up their lens in terms of talent they want to hire. Diversity, globalization, different backgrounds, and so forth. And probably the best example when I went to Boston is we acquired, I think one of the vendors probably here, Cameron Health, is a company that we acquired right away. And the previous leadership team had no desire to buy that company, quite frankly, whoever they're here. And but it was really just new eyes that saw different possibilities with it. So we really encourage our leaders, and it's not easy to do, to diversify their hiring skill set. You know, gentleman who runs interventional cardiology with us now, I used to work with at GE Healthcare. There's a lot of resistance to bring him in because he wasn't from interventional cardiology, but he's brought more to that job in 2 years. We now have a woman who runs our men's health penile implant business. And it's a long story, but she's doing an incredible job with that. And people said, yeah, you can't hire her. She's not from the implant business. She's not a guy. Definitely a different perspective. But doing a wonderful job.
So
but it's so easy to hire from a competitor in your same field. And to me, it's usually a mistake.
Well, one of the other things that I thought was very interesting what you said is that you planned that you wanted to be a large company CEO. I think one of the things we teach our fellows or when we talk to them is also think about where you want to be, and oftentimes you have to, it's not the next job, but you have to take some steps.
Yep.
Can you talk a little bit about how you, either in your experience at J&J or elsewhere, or even how did you know you wanted to be that and that this would be the
So
step?
I didn't know, and again, it's not for everybody because you age quickly, but I wanted, when I was at Global Healthcare Exchange, I loved it. And I wanted to see if we could do something, because at the time we couldn't unleash as much potential. They're doing quite well now, but I felt we could do more. So I wanted to do something different because I was young. And I'll be honest with you, I interviewed for a couple small company CEO jobs and didn't get them. And so because people didn't know what the heck Global Healthcare Exchange was at the time. So I said, I got to get some like a big boy job with a company that people understand it. And I was fortunate to have some context, and I got the job at J&J.
I gotcha. And so, you know, after you were at DePuy for a couple years, but then when did you get tapped to then run all of J&J's medical device and diagnostics business? And so for those of you who don't know.
After I screwed up DePuy.
No, but I mean, you know, were you ready, or was it a call? You know, how did these things happen?
No, actually, Alex Gorski, a good friend of mine, is the CEO now. We were coming back from Switzerland. We were just acquired Synthes. And on the flight home, he asked me if I wanted to do it. And so I said, yeah, I had to turn that one down because it's a great company and all the divisions. And it was 25 billion or so in revenue at the time. And so I said, terrific.
So tell us a little bit about that. So you were at the chairman, and so for those, you know, again, J&J Medical Devices and Diagnostics, you hinted at it's a massive organization. How many, 7 or 8, 10 franchises across like everything, vision, neuro, ortho. What did you think was going to be the biggest challenge about having all of these different, do they all have different cultures? How are you, I mean, it's one thing to be the CEO and run a division like DePuy.
Right.
It's different to run 7 different little companies.
Right. Well, so to me, the importance is to actually understand that. And the magic of, I think, say, a Boston Scientific division is not making every division the same. And so I think what's really important at diversified companies is to have a set of common values, you know, that work, that all companies can resonate with. But it's okay to have a different culture at you know, our CRM division versus our endoscopy and urology, and not forcing everybody to kind of be the same. And so I'm a pretty strong believer in more decentralization. You know, in our current company, Boston Scientific, my only company, Boston Scientific, we centralize ops, quality, and supply chain, and everything else is highly decentralized. And so you get an entrepreneurial spirit from the global president, ideally, who wants to drive global growth very aggressively for the division and their power to do that, and then try to create some R&D synergies and so forth. But, you know, at J&J, the company's so large, and at MD&D, what I learned in that job was all about, quite frankly, portfolio management and globalization, because the company's characters were, other than the Credo values that J&J employees have, the companies are very different. And so I learned the most leadership-wise on making difficult calls on portfolio, on rationalization of businesses, and globalization. So that's where I learned the most from GE on speed and results orientation, most at Global Healthcare Exchange on taking risks and the importance of culture and portfolio and global stuff at J&J.
So maybe one question that, you know, when you're balancing all these things.
And how to be a dad right now with a teenage daughter.
That's probably it.
That's the toughest.
Yeah. So at J&J, when you're running all these businesses, I mean, one of the biggest questions is, how do you foster innovation when you have to make trade-offs? How will you help the group leaders pick or say no, because you can't do everything? How do you get knowledgeable enough, or do you really just trust the divisions and say, like, give me your top one, and this year it's you, and next year it's not you? Or
Well, I'll do it more at Boston,
Yeah.
because I've been there for 6 years now. So we're not as wide as J&J, but we're pretty wide, 7 businesses. And so what we do is, it's not crazy stuff. We really empower our team there. So if you run endoscopy, your job is to grow your sales faster than the market, grow your income faster than sales, and you do that, you'll have a higher R&D spend. So we have other than Edwards, the highest R&D spend in the industry, over close to 11%. And so what we do is we really, in our operating plan and strat plan, enable the presidents and their teams to really create aggressive plans on, driving down R&D expense in the core businesses that are slow, if they are slow, and really investing much higher in new growth adjacencies or looking at M&A. And we really push tougher metrics on the percent of R&D in those different buckets that forces some choices. Otherwise, it's easy to spend higher dollars in R&D in core businesses that aren't growing because it's just more comfortable.
Yeah.
So we kind of force that. But then we also, so each business will roll those up, really empowered by the president and the R&D leader. In advance of that, they have targets that they have to deliver. So they're forced to make tough trade-offs on businesses and therapies based on the operating income targets that we give them. So right away, they're forced with a screen, and then they make tough decisions there. And then we look corporately as to which spaces that we like the most, and we try to invest, obviously, much stronger in those.
Gotcha. So maybe this is a good time to transition to, in the last half hour or so, to Boston Scientific. So as many of you know, in the mid-2000s, when Boston Scientific had acquired Guidant, there was a lot of things that they inherited, which had to be worked through. Mm. You're the CEO or the group president of MDD at J&J, which is actually a much bigger company itself than Boston Scientific. 2011, you get tapped, or in the running for this. Not the best ship to enter at that moment. So maybe you can talk a little bit about how you looked at Boston Scientific. And again, you weren't.
I'll tell you a quick story, and I've told it before, so the audio is probably okay. And I was blessed by the folks at J&J for putting me in Depew when I was running Global Healthcare Exchange and to run MD&D. Incredible company, and nothing but thanks for that. And I think I helped the company as well. So anyway, truth be told, I actually met with Ray Elliott when he was the CEO, because I wanted, I knew Alex Skorsky or Sherry McCoy, and Alex ended up going to get the job. But I really wanted a shot at something. And I met with Ray Elliott, who was running Boston, and I said, hey, I'm just wondering, you look like you might be retiring. I didn't say it quite like that, but maybe you're retiring soon. Do you have a number 2? He said, no, I'm not that old. I'm not retiring. I had to pay for breakfast, and I flew back to New Jersey. That didn't go well. And then about 6 months later, I'm in the office, and he resigned out of the blue the day before an earnings call, or the day after an earnings call, resigned. And I said to myself, it's just like, in college, like I didn't have that many dates, but if you like somebody and you're going to date, you shouldn't call like right away. You should like put some time in between. Don't act like you're overly interested or something. So I said that to myself, and then like 45 seconds later, I called up the recruiter. So that's enough time.
Exactly.
So that's the job I want. And so I was interested in it, and quite frankly, I was a bit naive. I didn't understand some of the challenges the company had gone through. And so what I did was I interviewed for a while, and they were looking at other people. And I actually consulted with a friend of mine who's a partner at a major strategic consulting firm. And I entrusted him. I said, I've got to make a decision here, whether to come over to the company or not. And would you help me out? And I actually paid him to do a little bit of a study for me for a week while I was interviewing. And he came back on a Friday, and we met, and he basically gave me the half-inch binder, and it basically said NFW. I won't translate that because you're all too smart, but I said, don't do this. Stay.
I don't understand that.
So basically stay where you are.
Well, I mean, again, looking for, was it only Boston, or were you looking at other companies? In general, did you want to make a move to be the top guy at a company?
I wanted that job because I figured it's a great brand name. It wasn't performing well. Great chance to turn it around. And to me, I thought there was never a better time to try it when it was not performing very well.
That is very, I mean, again, that's a great lesson to be, there's opportunity, a huge opportunity to come into that. So with this friend who you trust and you know, gives you a report, consultant report saying,
Yeah.
don't do it.
That's why you do it.
Exactly.
That's what my daughter says to me.
Is it just because?
No, so anyway, I ended up spending time with Pete, Nicholas, and the board, and really believed that they would give the new leadership team there the ability to lead it differently and to get the company back to where it should be, which is an incredible name and momentum. So they had a lot of confidence that they would do that, and they took a big risk because I had a non-compete. And so when I first joined, J&J sued me, and then I couldn't do the job for 10 months. And they agreed actually to put me on the sideline.
Yeah. When Hank was,
Yeah, then Hank Cushman did a great job. So I simply went because those jobs don't come open very often, and I hadn't been a public company CEO before, so it's a great opportunity.
So actually, you mentioned Pete Nichols, and you know, Boston Scientific was for many, you know, was from early 1970s. John Aberle and Pete Nichols came together to create this kind of a company that kind of in the same vein of ACS. A lot of the real important medtech companies, they fostered a very strong culture that it seems to have maybe not gone necessarily the way they had probably wanted in the mid-2000s, leading to this opportunity. Maybe you can spend a little time talking about when you spent time with at least Pete, I don't know, probably with John Aberle too. What did you feel that all the things you learned about the importance of culture and team building, all the lessons we've been talking about from the other companies, that you wanted to bring to Boston that, you know?
So they were really terrific. They were very hands off the company by that point in time. And they would attend board meetings, and really that was about it. And great guidance and coaching, but not involved in the operations of the company. And so we just looked at it as a great chance to have this great brand that are underperforming and kind of do a reboot on with the leadership team, the values of the company. So we basically treated it like a new company. We literally started over with Boston Scientific Advancing Science for Life. We created our core values. We created what's great at Boston Scientific. And we just essentially completely re-engaged a employee base who got used to not winning. And that's what the biggest thing I saw is originally the company was our teams were getting used to not winning. And then when you do that, you start creating targets that aren't winning targets. And sales reps go on award trips when they don't do that well, but they beat their target. And that kind of starts to foster. And it was very tentative and very risk averse. Right. And so we spent a lot of time on rooting that out and creating a new vision for the company that was exciting. A lot of the same leaders are still there. And we brought in some new leaders, kind of a mix, that really viewed it as just like you would a startup. Let's pretend like this is an incredibly brand new company. We're going to create a new culture, a new pace to it, and a winning spirit. And that's what we've done. That's what we're doing, I should say. We're clearly not done.
Did you have to fight internal tendencies? I mean, it's one thing to be the outside guy who wants to come in and change everything up. And obviously, again, maybe it's good for the audience to maybe tell them how bad things were in terms of losses per quarter, and then you really determine that. Did the board give you a mandate, like, or maybe they didn't?
No, they were
like turn it around in a year or in 2 years, like you did. It sounds like
we're at the time we were just overly concentrated in drug-eluting stents and pacemakers, defibrillators, and our pipeline wasn't quite as robust as it needed to be. And the other businesses were deprioritized in terms of R&D spend and didn't have a big enough impact on the company. And so we basically made a goal, besides all the cultural stuff, which is the most important, to essentially diversify the company more aggressively. And today, in 2020, drug-eluting stents and CRM, although they're great markets for us and we're growing and they pay the bills, will be about less than a third of the company. And 2/3 is everything else.
And now they're about a half.
Yeah, and when I joined, it was like 75%. Okay. And so, we did a lot to diversify away and just focus so much on shifting the growth profile of the company into faster growth markets. And not to be too much of a cheerleader, but we have so much of that going on right now. And we just really, the portfolio prioritization has been a really important process for us. And then the globalization. We were a very U.S.-centric. For example, most of our presidents were measured on U.S. sales and U.S. income, and we had no business, very small business in Asia. So we hired a lot of great new leaders in Asia, created global operating companies, decentralized, and empowered our leaders to make decisions and to move quickly.
So, I think in the new growth areas, which are smaller, it's easy to show growth because when you're starting small, it's on the bigger stuff, you still put a lot of resources. Maybe spend a little time talking about, in this time period, J&J was, well, not yet exited, but was going to exit the drug-eluting stent market. But you guys have been able to focus a lot and still maintain a significant leadership position. Given what you knew about J&J and everything, even when you were overseeing MDD and seeing the market, what did you see in the Boston stent business, the interventional cardiology business, or other adjacencies that said, like, we're going to really spend time and money while we grow the other places, but make sure we're still a leader in this, and not go where J&J went?
Yeah, I won't comment on J&J stuff because that's their deal. But for us, drug-eluting stents is a good market. The market is like a flat market, but we grow in drug-eluting stents, and we have an excellent cost profile and an excellent operations supply chain team that manages. We get about 8% VIP productivity improvements each year. Wow. That helps offset the pricing impact. And so we have an incredibly strong operations supply chain team, and we have a great capability. The biggest thing, the capabilities within those businesses are so strong, and they're the ones that are developing. The Synergy stent was an organic platform. We're working on the second generation Watchman program, all our structural heart pieces. But for us, core drug-eluting stents help support the investments into faster growth markets within that division. Oh. Similarly, in CRM, the profitability of our defibrillator, SICD, and pacemakers enables us to invest more in EP, where we're not quite scaled up as much as we want to be, and all these other heart failure diagnostic areas that we want to get into.
Maybe with that, we can also talk about some of the products that you guys have been, you mentioned Watchman. So Watchman, for those of you who don't know, is a left atrial appendage occluder for people who have atrial fibrillation risk for a stroke. You've been putting, is those are the adjacencies that the stent business supports, and is that kind of the approach you'll take as these new areas get bigger and then get more stable to go adjacent in them?
Yeah, so even within interventional cardiology, which is one of our 7, in 2011, like 80% of that business was drug-eluting stents. So if that same circle in 2020, a third, maybe 40% of that business will be drug-eluting stents because they moved into complex coronary image guidance, FFR, our Watchman atrial appendage device. We recently acquired a company called Symetis and TAVR. We have our Lotus TAVR valve. So structural heart, complex coronary, and drug-eluting stent just within that circle, whereas before it really was drug-eluting stent.
Sounds like the same thing on the CRM side.
That's the same thing across the whole company. Yeah. And that's what's allowed us to move into faster growth markets as broadly, because you do that within each you do it within cardiology, and same thing within CRM, same thing within neuromodulation and urology and so forth.
Do you ever, in each of these portfolios, they're all each run as their own business, do you ever take funds to support new, like you have 7 businesses now, would there ever be an 8th?
Well, we don't treat them all the same. So we do invest disproportionately. So we look at the corporate, I hate that word, but we look at that corporate layer, I guess, and we look at areas that just require more investment. So we put more into structural heart at the expense of other things we want to do. There's some really disruptive things that we like in endoscopy now that we're going to fund disproportionately. We're creating a new cancer. Right now we treat cancer in our endo business and in our peripheral interventions business. We're creating a much broader cancer focus and investing in that. So we do seek programs out that need more funding, and we'll figure out the right spots in the company to pull that from.
So one of the things as you think about the portfolio and as you grow, we've had other CEOs here like Omar Ishrak, et cetera, and Medtronic in other companies are maybe going towards more of a service focus as well as products. How do you think the service component of the business and managing chronic diseases plays here? Or is Boston still primarily a medical device, lots of, for lack of a better word, shiny objects type of thing?
So candidly, we are clearly and I would say Medtronic's the same, a medical device company. That's where 99% of the revenue comes from, and similar with Medtronic. We have unique products. For example, not to be a commercial, but our CRM devices last forever. They last like 10 years, which is great for the patient, sometimes tough on the economic change-out curve for hospitals. And what we live in today is this fee-for-service world that we may want to go to a more bundled payment type program. And you have a device that lasts twice as long, which is a patient will have maybe one less implant and less risk of infection. Yet the economics today still are not aligned with the hospital to buy that way. And so our strategy is to have unique, compelling health economic benefits, which you need. We have the same thing with Watchman to prove why it's better than drugs and so forth. So especially our new products go through heavy healthcare economic screen. And if in fact one day the payment model actually does shift, we think we have some very unique technologies there. Secondly, our focus is on category leadership. And so we always want to be chosen either one or two if big hospital systems down selected 3 or 2 vendors. Yeah. And to me, the key there is unique innovation. And so we really try to find unique innovation besides our core businesses that enable that. And on the services side, we don't believe that we offer lots of things on lean optimization within the hospital, converting to more electronic EDI, looking at whether they're billing properly. So we enable some services. We are not in the business of buying hospitals or buying clinics or outsourcing cath labs. So that's a model that we will not go to, at least no plans to.
So maybe we have about 10 minutes or so. Why don't you, if people have questions, start thinking of making your way to the mic. And maybe one of my last questions would be, you've done a great job in the last 6 years. Clearly, it's reflected in the street, on the street in terms of the share price and kind of the products you brought out. I think the big question for a lot of people, like, where do you, in your position, see the opportunities in medtech? Not just necessarily within your businesses, but in general, as you look at your strat plan, 3, 5, 7 years and beyond.
Yeah, so we have Investor Day coming up in June, so you're all invited to go or dial in. So there's a lot, besides as I won't repeat all of it, but there's so many new adjacencies that we like. Heart failure diagnostics, emphysema, pulmonary, structural heart, deep brain stimulation. We're doing a lot of investments in our microelectronics businesses, opportunities in Alzheimer's, opportunities in stroke, opportunities to disrupt infection control in some of our divisions. I won't get into that much more. So we see lots of cancer, oncology. We're creating a whole new oncology team. So we just keep looking at advancing science for life. And besides being a category leader, all those new areas I just mentioned, drug-eluting capabilities and peripheral vascular, are all fast-growing markets with a lot of unmet need. And that can, clearly drive the growth profile of the company faster. Most analysts have us growing at the higher end of med tech, which I would support, and we guide that way, and we have plans to deliver that. But then beyond all those categories, clearly, the intersection with sensor technology, big data, and diagnostics to keep people out of the hospital is a big effort for us. We have internal programs like something called Heart Logic on our CRM devices, which is a lead that will help once a patient has an implant, can actually look at the onset of an episode 30 days before they actually may have one. So you want to try to keep the patient outside of the hospital, and it looks at everything from respiratory rates, There's like 6 different categories to measure. So we're looking at more, besides the therapeutic device, a touch more on the diagnostic side, to really go with the grain of healthcare and keeping the patient out of the hospital, either pre or post. So beyond our portfolio, you'll see us looking more at solutions and diagnostics that help that.
And maybe, well, if any other questions, another question is, we talked about earlier when you were visiting with us at Biodesign about bigger companies taking a role earlier in smaller startups.
Yep.
I mean, we all know here that medtech funding has been challenged, but corporates are seeing that there's big innovation, opportunities for getting on the ground to help figure out the right trial, the right, and have a peak and, use their leverage on the back end for sales and marketing distribution.
Right.
What is your philosophy on where you see Boston doing more of that or less of that in terms of getting in early?
We've really done a lot of that the last 4 years, at least a lot in terms of our world. So we didn't have that VC capability. Now we have a portfolio of about 32 companies that we've invested over the past 4 years, which is a lot for us. And what we essentially do is look at all these spaces and say, is this something we can do organically in R&D? Is it something we need to acquire now because it's scaled up? Or take more of a bet, keep it off our P&L, and also look at it for the future with this VC fund. And we have over 30 companies in it now, kind of balanced across our big cardiovascular, medical, surgical, and rhythm management businesses. And a handful of those we have, high amounts of equity and maybe prearranged buyouts. And some we have our very early stage, Series A, where we own a small %. So we've essentially used that tool, knowing that we don't have the biggest balance sheet in the industry, as a way to ideally move quickly and position ourselves to ideally buy the company if it moves along.
Do you see that taking over some of your internal R&D spend over time?
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't say take it over. We don't see the need. We're at 11% now, so it's more of an augment. But we think R&D spend as a percent come down a little bit over time. But most of these companies we invest in are capabilities that we just don't have, or it would take forever to ramp it up. And it wouldn't happen because there's too many other priorities.
Great. Any questions from the audience? Oh, here's one.
Hi, thank you for an interesting conversation.
Come on, you were dozing.
That's why I started talking.
Good for you.
Good company.
So I have 2 questions. One, do you follow some kind of formula for how you allocate R&D? Meaning, what percentage goes to the core products, what goes to adjacencies, and what goes to wild ideas or new things? That's for a second. Once you develop a product, you know there's a market for it, and you're in a complex ecosystem. Have you learned any tricks to move the ecosystem faster?
So the first one's, maybe Fred has ideas how to move the ecosystem faster, but I don't. And the first one, it really depends on the growth profile of the business. So, if in drug-eluting stents, the core market's doesn't grow as fast. And so we spend a little bit less as a % of R&D there. The core business of spinal cord stimulation is growing more than double digits. And so we invest a higher % of R&D in that core business in spinal cord stimulation because the market characteristics are so strong. And so it really depends by business whether that core business is a high grower or a low grower. If it's a high grower, then our core spend's higher as a %, and adjacencies are less, or we'll use the VC fund. If that core business has characteristics where the market's slower, we push down R&D spend a lot as a % of sales and seek adjacencies in that area. And if we can't find them, then we put them somewhere else. So it depends on the baseline growth profile of that business first.
So it's all based on market growth rates. So
Market and then our uniqueness within that market. So we like our position. I keep talking about we have lots of different products. The market growth rate's a big indicator, but also you look at our pipeline, and of course you're always looking at the competition and try to come up with that math. So we do have a formula, but I don't want to give it all out. But that's kind of how we do it.
But it's at the division level, not at central level. You don't have certain percentage allocated.
We do actually, yeah.
Okay.
We have a guideline for the company that we use.
Okay.
And then we try to get that all to generally match that guideline
And
for the whole
that's the
corporation.
secret you won't give away. And
Other-
on the ecosystem,
Yeah.
any comments?
Not sure I understand what's the ecosystem question?
So you
I went to
come-
Iowa, I don't, boil it down for me.
So you make a product, you have to convince the regulators, the hospital, the doctors. You have a complex value chain, and generally they take their time. They have their purchasing process, and I don't know, 20
Yeah.
different things have to be done. And is there a way to move that faster? Because even when the product is ready, you can't get the revenue because it takes time.
So I was with the couple of the talented engineering students, and we talked about a product called a layer. And I'm not sure if any of the layer people were here in the room that were involved with a layer. It's a great product to treat severe asthma. I would say really good, maybe not perfect 5-year data, but really good data. And it changes the life of patients with severe asthma. Those patients sometimes don't leave their house or stay within a mile of a hospital because they're on so many meds and so terrified. And so there's and it's public now, Richard Jefferson, the former basketball player at Golden State here, and now at Cleveland. 12 years ago, or 4 years ago, he was going to stop playing basketball, actually, when he was playing for Golden State, because his asthma was so bad. Actually had the Lair procedure here done in San Francisco, changes his life. Now he's played, extended his career 4 more years, and now he's doing online digital marketing for us and as a patient advocate, and it's life-changing for him. Incredible product, but it's like it's like not even a bunt single for us in terms of financially moving the needle for us. And it's all about the healthcare economics and working with individual payers. And so that has just been a slugfest. And here in Cleveland, we're showing that TV ad, but it wasn't reimbursed in Cleveland. And so now we got it reimbursed in Cleveland, which is good. But it's almost literally payer by payer. And so when we look at innovation now in R&D, that reimbursement screen and the economic value screen is now a massive big screen TV. Whereas 5 or 6 years ago, it was all about getting CE mark and FDA approval. But reimbursement, payer reaction is maybe more important than FDA approval now. And so that's a big learning for us, and we look at that screen really hard with all our new products and companies that we're looking at buying.
Great, thank you.
Thank you for a great presentation. So I have heard from a number of health systems that they're interested in tracking outcomes for electrophysiology and also Watchman. So do you see any impediment to creating any kind of registry, and who do you see taking the leadership role in that, if that were to?
No, no issue with creating a LAC registry. We have lots of new clinical studies that we'll talk about at Investor Day. We're having great outcomes with it. Our sales of it are very strong, and so we wouldn't object at all.
Do you see combining the data from all the sites that are using
Yeah.
the device so that other sites can see?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so that's not.
What form do you see that taking generally? I mean,
What form?
well, like, how do you see yourself making it available for different health systems that are?
That
using-
registry data. That's a good question. I don't know, Dave, maybe you can help me out. I'm not sure exactly how that gets externalized. Dave, you no idea. I went to my lefty and he.
Thank you.
So we can follow up with you, but we're having Watchman's a unique breakthrough platform for us. We have a big head start in the U.S. and we're getting really nice outcomes from it, and we're starting now to do some more innovative things to educate patients directly on it and training. But anyway, on the registry, externalizing that is something that would make sense. We can find out how to answer that question for you.
Another question over here from Fred.
How you
How are you,
doing,
Fred?
Mike?
Good to see you.
Great to have you here. So I'm going to ask you a non-technical question. And I think what we all probably around here would be interested in is your perspective on leadership cultivation, because I think what you did with Boston Scientific, as you were describing it, an organization that was doing well but didn't feel like they were winning, and then you came in and really started uplifting the management team, basically, which uplifted the the company.
Right.
What are your perspectives on how do you create that leadership cultivation in an organization?
I don't know, but I think that is the key. One is, I'd say a couple points that I think about a lot is 95% of our employees could care less what our stock price is and have no idea what it is because they don't have many stock options, or they do, but it's not, doesn't change their life at all. And so what those employees want, which are the heartbeat of the company every day in supply chain and IT and all over the company, is they want a company that they're proud of, number one. They can go home with their family or friends and have like a little bit of, I'm proud of what I do. Have some, believe in the culture and what the kind of value system is a big deal. And then they have some level of career development, if that's some level of career development. And we don't get it right all the time. We always, we have turnover as well. But we spend a lot of time thinking about those aspects. As basic as having our managers actually having one-on-one discussions with their employees to talk about career development. So I think that one is recognizing that not everybody thinks about our earnings call on Thursday. 90% of our employees really don't care. And is the culture compelling? So we do a lot to bring real patient stories in all the time. Constantly bringing patients in live to our facilities, roundtables, engaging them, rotating employees. We create something called Imagine If, which is an innovation fund across the entire company. So if you're an administrator, if you're in the distribution warehouse, innovation's beyond just the R&D team. So we encourage our employees to create innovation ideas and projects. We reward them for it. We'll fund about 100 of them a time. It gives them recognition. It creates a culture of innovation is good and risk-taking is good beyond just R&D. And so it engages the company employees more. So that's one. And then with the leadership team, to me, it's a lot of it just authentic. First of all, I just don't like big, bureaucratic, slow things. And so I really love leaders who have the sometimes courage to make the tough calls on portfolio or people and relish that. Not saying they have to do everything like just on their own. They work with their team to do that. But I do like leaders who are comfortable with making that decision and not have it be so kind of bureaucratic. So I like to create that culture. But also you really want authentic leaders who are very team-oriented. We're in the ultimate team sport. So if you're an I person, it doesn't work very well in a company like ours.
Maybe the one last question.
Yes. Hi, nice to meet you. My question is in a big company like Boston Scientific, where I actually happen to be an employee. Thank you.
Oh, yeah. Great. What do you do?
And
So everything I'm saying bogus?
no, it's mostly true. It's
Mostly true.
No, but you'd mentioned earlier about how you try to keep sort of divisions are their own little thing. They can all do their own thing. But fortunately, I work for operations, and we see a lot of what different companies do.
Right.
And how do you sort of balance letting each company do what they want to do, but at the same time, there's so much talent in each division that you put them together, and you can do so much more. How do you sort of balance that? And what question? How do you? That is the
toughest. That's a great question. And so what it's working for us is we have centralized, as you know, operations. Well, we have operations, clearly many divisions have, but we at least under common leadership, under operations, IT, and quality, with common systems and common platforms. We ideally like to move people from different plants, supervisor, manager jobs, and use the VIP tools to drive cost productivity and to create new innovation. Hopefully that gets shared across the network. So hopefully, maybe we're not seeing it, that occurs more naturally, hopefully in operations, quality, and IT, and I'm sure we have some improvement areas. My bias is, and the business level, is to not centralize R&D for a med device company. Some companies do that. I don't think it's the right way to go. I think med tech's very different from pharma, and I think there's a uniqueness within a electrophysiology business that's different from a urology division. And so I think there's more power having a leader of that urology business who wants to be number one in urology and look at these adjacencies and think like crazy about that, and an R&D team and global marketing team who's aligned around that. Because I think that entrepreneurial spirit and ownership and accountability, if you have the right leaders, is more powerful. The offset of that is you centralize all of R&D, which I've seen in some areas. And there's a little bit less accountability. And I think you lose a bit of the entrepreneurism within divisions. So the trade-off of that is sometimes it's a bit more costly model. And so you have to find ways to not make the cost too high. And then, what Dave does and our team does is we try to, and I'm sure we have tons of room for improvement, we try to find best practices even within R&D. So we take our imaging capability from IVUS in California here, and we drop it in endoscopy, and they're looking at deep nodules in the lung for pulmonary cancer. So we leverage capabilities. So what we do there is we look at platforms. So rather than disease state, we're an expert in cryo, we're an expert in ablation, we're an expert in delivery systems, what unmet needs. So we try to create unique kind of scale advantages by leveraging R&D across, despite being siloed. So it is a great question. Companies are organized differently. For me, as long as I'm here, we'll have decentralized R&D and global marketing, because I think there's more power in that. But it's a good question. You would have other people here who would probably disagree with that.
No. I mean, I think
that's how we're running.
I think in the interest of time, I think hopefully this conversation, I know it made me realize with all of your experiences why you were the guy to take Boston from where it was 6 years ago to where it is today. So I think, and more important,
I'm just the cheerleader.
Well, yeah. But I think having the vision, and I think everything you said about the importance of people and team and culture is important, even if you're just two people starting a company. Yep. So please join me in thanking Mike for a great talk.
Thank you.
Yeah.